Do you want to record the post-play discussion? Open the door then.
And just a word. Sorry,
No problem, no problem.
Coming. I see that we have many people in the audience today who probably not follow the language, but it's really wonderful that you came. And maybe some of you had read the story before, so you could actually to get a sense of what it was like for you to listen and watch a play in a language that was quite foreign to all of you. I wanted to say a few words about the play and about the writer. It's extremely impressive that this group that just started 2 months ago, really, has in a very, very short span of time put together this performance in Hindustani, and also that they've had the courage to actually present something like this in Minneapolis that I would not have thought really possible, a few years ago. And it's also quite wonderful to see that on both days of the performance we've actually had a good audience here, and that people have expressed interest in seeing performances like this. Why start with Ismat Chughai's story? They've started, this is their first venture, and this is based on a story by Ismat Chughai. I think part of the reason, at least, I'm sure there were some just sort of strategic factors, but I think part of the decision has to do with Chughai's work. She is one of the most outspoken, interesting, provocative women writers of the 20th century. She was part of the Progressive Writers Association, a group of writers who thought very seriously about changing the ways in which their broad audience thinks about the relationship between aesthetics and politics. So they took it as their mission to think about changing the ways in which people conceive of what is entertainment, what is beauty, what is love, and wrote stories to that effect. She was also a very controversial writer. She was hauled up, as Divya mentioned earlier in the introduction, she was hauled up before a court to respond to obscenity charges against one of her stories, where she deals in a very sort of covert and nuanced way with the question of lesbianism. So she was, the story, there were obscenity charges, she defended the story, she was acquitted, because ostensibly there was actually nothing in the story itself. It was all suggestive, right? So they couldn't actually point to a passage that was obscene. So she was acquitted. So this story, as you've seen, brings into focus a whole constellation of questions of caste, of class, of gender, of sexuality, eroticism, all sorts of things. There's a lot that's going on in the story. The language is very lively, it's very nuanced, it's also very funny. So I'm not going to say a whole lot more. I'll just bring a couple of things to your attention and then see what you have to say and what the cast members have to say. One is that this question of hands is something that really occupies Chughai. This is an image, a figure that she keeps returning to in her work. This story is called Doha, Two Hands. And I wanted to read to you a little passage from another of her stories, another very famous story called Chauthi Ka Joda, where this image comes back. The context in the story is that the story is set in a very poor family, and there are two sisters, an older sister and a younger sister. The older sister is of marriageable age, and the family is concerned that she should get married. And this cousin comes to visit and stay with them. And the younger sister and the mother are both hoping that the cousin will offer to marry the older sister. And the older sister is working very hard to, she's feeding the cousin, she's making clothes for him, she's cleaning his room to please him. The cousin, meanwhile, is simply taking everything. He has no intention of marrying her, and he's flirting with the younger sister. And the younger sister observes all this, and she's extremely upset. She's upset on behalf of her older sister. She's angry with the cousin, and it's written in her voice. So I'm just going to read you a little bit, and I'll try and translate some of it as well, but to show you where this question of hands comes in. The older sister has knit a sweater for the cousin, which the younger sister has gone to present to him. स्वेटर देखकर राहत ने अपनी एक आईब्रो शरारत से ऊपर तानकर कहा, क्या ये स्वेटर आपने बुना है? नहीं तो भाई हम नहीं पहनेंगे। मेरा जी चाहा कि उसका मुंह नोच लूं। कमीने मिट्टी के लौंडे, ये स्वेटर उन हाथों ने बुना है जो जीते जागते गुलाम हैं। इसके एक एक फंदे में किसी नसीबों जली के अरमानों की गर्दनें फंसी हुई हैं। ये उन हाथों का बुना हुआ है जो नन्हे पकोड़े झुलाने के लिए बनाए गए हैं। उनको थाम लो गधे कहीं के, और ये दो पतवार बड़े से बड़े तूफान के थपेड़ों से तुम्हारी जिंदगी की नाव को बचाकर पार लगा देंगे। ये सितार की गत न बचा सकेंगे, मणिपुरी और भरतनाट्यम की मुद्रा न दिखा सकेंगे। इन्हें पियानो पर रक्स करना नहीं सिखाया गया, इन्हें फूलों से खेलना नहीं नसीब हुआ, मगर ये हाथ तुम्हारे जिस्म पर चर्बी चढ़ाने के लिए सुबह से शाम तक सिलाई करते हैं, साबुन और सोडे में डुबकियां लगाते हैं, चूल्हे की आंच सहते हैं, तुम्हारी गलाजतें धोते हैं। इनमें कभी चूड़ियां नहीं खनकती हैं, इन्हें कभी किसी ने प्यार से नहीं थामा। So the gist of the passage is, she goes to take him the sweater, and he's flirting with her, and he says, have you knit the sweater? And she says no, and he says, oh, then I won't wear it. And then there's a long passage where the younger sister says that I wanted to just smack him in the face, and I wanted to tell him that think of the hands that have knit this sweater for you, these hands that have, they don't know how to play the piano, they have never been taught the classical dances, they don't do flower arrangements, they clean, they cook, they sew, and these are the hands that if you grasp them, they will be companions. They'll be your companions for the rest of your life. But the whole passage, it's very, I'm not doing it justice at all, it's very beautifully written, and it's a very sort of slow meditation on the labor, the quiet labor that women's hands perform. So this is an image that keeps coming back, and we can talk more about it. I think I'll just stop here actually and see, hear what reactions you have, responses, your questions, and then at some point we can turn to the audience, to the cast, and ask them also about their experiences.
Being very unfamiliar with the language and having read this beforehand and then try to piece it together, from my viewpoint anyway, I'd like to make a couple of suggestions. Introduce all the characters as to what their names are in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see them come on, we know, oh yeah, this is Dory or whatever.
Right.
And then secondly, when you have the narrator, once in a while, I think the narrator should, in English once in a while, explain some of the things that are going on too, because you can't follow the script while the thing is going on. I read it in advance and then I tried to piece it together. But it would kind of nice to know who the characters are before, rather than introducing them after it's over. It would help, at least from my viewpoint, not being familiar with the language, it would help because the story is great. I mean, I thought it was terrific, but I'm trying to, I think I had people figured out who they were, but I had to wait a while to, and if I knew in advance that, oh, this is the person I read about, this is the husband from the service, and this is Gloria, the newlywed, and this is the, I'm still not quite sure who's the one that became the father of this baby. I think, but I'm not sure yet who was the father, because the husband wasn't. So I'm still not sure who's the father.
Right.
I think it's him, but maybe not. But that would, at least it would help me to relate more to the language and the scripture. I think it was great. I think that the idea is terrific, and I like to know more about the various cultures.
Right.
Let's face it, a lot of the things that happen in your culture happen in ours too.
Exactly.
Oh yeah,
So
a
it's
lot
very
of similar.
Thank you. Sonia.
I had read it before, and I was actually sort of moving back and forth between the script and the stage to try to maintain the links. And one thing I was struck by in seeing it on the stage that I hadn't really taken in and reading it the first time was the voice of the narrator. The voice of the narrator was a different cast. And what struck me in terms of the embodiment of glory was that the description from the narrator's point of view was really placing that body to a space of the abject, right? That there was this really vivid language that was conjuring a kind of disgust, and the way that the actress performed that was in opposition to the description. And that suddenly that tension between, well, how do I know that the faithfulness of the narrator's point of view came into question for me, and that's certainly a thematic that gets played out at the end. That the values of a certain kind of class and caste get questioned by those who require something other than a set of social values in order to sustain their material conditions. So anyway, that's something that struck me about.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. And that's, that's something that happens a lot with Jutai stories. The narrative voice in this story is again of a young girl. We're not sure exactly the age, but she positions herself as the daughter of the house, because at the end she talks about her father. And so presumably she's the daughter of the upper class house. And in a lot of the stories, it's the real transformation occurs in the consciousness of the narrator. I mean, my sense is actually reading Jutai that that's where she placed her hope, is in the younger generation, especially the younger generation of women who, and that's why there is always this double voice, because they are at once part of the consciousness that she wants to critique, but there is a change that occurs too. And here, of course, the change even occurs in the father at the very end, and that's, but you're absolutely right that, those descriptions, and it's also sort of strange because the descriptions are often from the perspective of someone who's much older. She would be, so there's a kind of shift there too, but yeah. Did you yes, Eric.
Just following on this, I was struck by the way in which you have a narrator who's obviously part of, or places herself as part of the household.
Yes.
And therefore presumably would be involved in all of this, yet at the same time she wishes to lift herself out.
Yes.
And look down on this in some sense from the outside and with a critical eye. And that's a very sort of substantial tension,
yes,
if you will, and not one that's problematized in the narrative, which is I read the English version. And then that led me to wonder what this had to do with, and to say about the author herself and the social position out of which she had come, and whether in some sense this is an autobiographical attempt to lift herself as the critic out from this family, from this household relationship.
She came from a very educated, middle-class family. She came from also a very progressive family. So she was one of the first Muslim women to get higher education. She was the principal of a girls' school. She started writing stories when she was very young. She also came from a very large family, 10 children. There were 10 siblings. And she writes about the fact that her mother never had time time for any of that. And so she was raised by servants. She grew up in the servant quarters, you know, the house. And so she writes about how all of this was extremely familiar to her. So it's very much, you know, a lot of the stories seem somewhat autobiographical in that sense.
Which I don't know if you would add anything to that.
There was a hand up there before.
Well, I'm not sure if I raised my hand. But I
You might
guess,
have wanted to.
but I guess now the description of that she grew up in the servants' quarters makes it for understanding the kind of language used. It's a better story to her, and now that I see this though heart, the kind of language used, you know, probably would not be coming from a person who in that era came from well-educated families. So it was very nice to know about her background. And just the sheer excitement of hearing something in Hindi from you was tremendous. I mean, growing up in a time when TV Metro used to house programs like Ek Kahan and stuff like that, I
Yes.
completely lost out on that, and I got that flavor here, which is amazing. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.